I have a job to do to defend the right of legitimate voters, citizens of our state. We've been asking for the Department of Homeland Security's database, SAVE, for months, and they haven't given it to us.
12 years ago, the presidential election turned on a 537-vote margin in Florida. Thousands of voters, we later learned, had misunderstood their ballots. Thousands more were turned away from the polls in error. Florida had failed one of the foundational rights we have as citizens, the right to vote. So after that embarrassment, you'd think they'd be pretty careful today, right? Yeah, you'd think that. Florida's Republican Governor Rick Scott announced today that his administration is suing the federal government in hopes of forcing the Department of Homeland Security to help him out with a big election year purge of Florida voters. Mr. Scott has said the purpose of the purge is to remove non-citizens from Florida voter rolls. But when Scott's administration sent a purge list to county election supervisors, those local officials found it to be riddled with inaccuracies. The Miami Herald reported the list was produced with, quote, some outdated data, and that it, quote, targeted hundreds of actual citizens who are lawful voters. Late last month, the Justice Department warned the state to stop the purge, saying it would appear to violate both the Voting Rights Act and the National Voter Registration Act, at which point the county election officials charged by the Rick Scott administration with carrying out the purge told the state they weren't going to do it anymore. Last week on this show, Rachel spoke with the Republican election supervisor from Volusia County, Florida, about her decision to halt the voter purge in her county.
So it looked like the list was bogus, if you will. It was outdated. Of the 15, 10 have never voted in Volusia County ever. So I just quietly put the list aside. There is a federal law in the NVRA, the National Voter Registration Act, that says in federal elections you cannot change, with few exceptions, you cannot change a person's voter registration history within 90 days of a federal election. So we aren't going to do anything with it, no matter if Governor Scott says do this. We just can't do it. It's against the law for me to do that.
But even after the warning from the Justice Department, even as local election officials, including many from Scott's own party, refused to carry out his big election year voter purge, Rick Scott's administration has plowed forward, promising to continue the purge.
This is not a time to wait till after the elections. It's time to act now to make sure that individuals that are voting are eligible to vote and that our voting rolls are accurate and clean here in Florida, and we plan to do that.
That was Florida's Secretary of State on Friday doing the rhetorical equivalent of thumbing his nose at the Justice Department. And today, Governor Scott announcing the lawsuit he hopes will force the federal government to help with the great Florida voter purge of 2012. But remember that part where the Justice Department said the Florida voter purge violated federal law? Yeah, it turns out they were serious about that. The Justice Department also announced a lawsuit today, saying they plan to sue to stop Florida from carrying out the purge, warning the state one more time to cut it out. Quote, please immediately seize this unlawful conduct. It's about as stark as it gets. As for Florida's argument that the Fed should be helping them with the purge, that they've been denied access to a Homeland Security database that is crucial to their voter purging process, the Justice Department says the database wouldn't help anyway. And the sloppy, error-prone purge is sloppy and error-prone because that's the way Rick Scott's administration has carried it out. Quote, your claim that the Department of Justice and Department of Homeland Security have worked in concert to deny Florida access to the SAVE program database is simply wrong. The significant problems you're encountering in administering this new program are of your own creation. Your program has critical imperfections which lead to errors that harm and confuse eligible voters, especially the program is based on information collected sometimes years ago from driver's license applications. The information is often going to be outdated as a number of persons will subsequently have become citizens and lawfully registered to vote. Your data appear to be faulty in other ways that have resulted in native-born citizens, including a decorated World War II combat veteran, being sent letters demanding they affirmatively prove their citizenship. We are aware that one county election supervisor who reviewed a state-provided list of over 1,000 potentially ineligible voters determined the list had a significant error rate, and she advised you that further use of the list would potentially disenfranchise eligible voters based on an inaccurate list. So, It's not clear at this point whether and how the Rick Scott administration might continue to carry out their election year voter purge, but it is clear they're determined to try to carry it out, no matter what. And in an election year, in the very state that decided the election 12 years ago on a razor-thin, error-ridden margin, you might think they'd know better. Indeed, the scary thought is they do know better, and that's why the deeply unpopular Scott administration is trying to kick these voters off the rolls.